Hello guys, how are you?
I'm Hardeep Singh. Welcome back to your own YouTube channel. IELTS updates and recent exams. For more updates related to recent IELTS exam writing test topics, listening, reading, practice test, and speaking, you got guesswork. Please, guys, participate in everyday listening and reading practice test to achieve your desired band score in your actual IELTS exam. Please hit the like and subscribe button. Press the bell icon for the upcoming notifications. Don't forget like, subscribe and share my YouTube channel and my Facebook page, IELTS updates and recent exams.
Part 1. You will hear a woman who is applying for a driving license. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5.
And what type of vehicle would you like to drive?
Oh, just a normal car.
That's a Class C licence then. Have you ever held a driving licence in another country?
Oh no, I'm too young. Anyway, I think I'd be too scared to drive in another country.
Right. I'll just need to get some personal details from you. Could I have your date of birth, please?
Yes, it's the 17th of March 1994.
And what's your address?
28 River Street.
That's spelt R-I-V-E-R. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's in Bentley, isn't it?
Yes.
OK. And your phone number?
I'll give you my home number. It's 3701 8699.
Right. And what form of ID do you have with you?
Well, I've got a bank card. Here it is.
Let's see. No, we need something with your photo on it, like a student card.
I've got that with me. Here you are.
Yeah, that's fine. Now, there's an application fee of $55. How would you like to pay? We take credit cards, but not cheques, I'm afraid. And we take cash, of course, if you have enough money with you.
I do, actually, and I try not to use my credit card if I can avoid it. Here you are.
Thank you.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
Right. Now, there are a few things I need to tell you about the licence. Before you actually drive a car, you have to pass a test about the road rules.
Oh, that's the test about speed limits and road signs and things like that, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. There are 2 parts to the test, and you're allowed to make a maximum of 2 errors in each section. So that's 4 altogether.
And if I fail the test, can I do it again?
Yes, you can, but you have to wait at least a week.
Right. And when I'm driving, there's got to be someone with me in the car who holds a full licence, doesn't there?
Yes. That could be a family member, a professional driving instructor, or a friend.
What about my older sister?
Sure, as long as she's got the right kind of licence. Now, the learner's licence is valid for 9 months. At the end of that time, you have to do a practical driving test. If you pass that, you're granted a provisional licence. That expires after 18 months. If you don't pass the practical driving test, you're given a learner's licence for another 6 months.
I see. And while I'm still on the learner's licence, how fast can I drive?
Well, it depends on the area you're driving in. In most places in the city, there's a speed limit of 60 kilometres an hour. As you probably know, on highways in the countryside, there's often a speed limit of 100 kilometres per hour. But as a learner, you're never allowed to exceed 80, even on a highway.
Right. I think that'd be fast enough for me anyway.
Is there anything else you need to know?
Oh yeah, I heard there are restrictions on using mobile phones while you're driving.
That's right. Until recently, you could only talk on a mobile while you're driving if you used an earphone or hands-free device. But that's been changed.
Oh?
Yeah. Now you can't use mobiles at all while driving.
Not even to send an SMS?
Not even to send an SMS. Anyway, if that's all, I'll give you a copy of the book on the road rules.
Thanks very much.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
You will hear a training officer giving a talk to new staff who will be working at the information desk at an airport. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen and answer questions 11 to 15.
Now, when you're working at the information desk in the arrivals section of the airport, one of the most common questions people ask is, what's the best way to get to the hotel or to a particular address once they leave the airport? The answer you give them depends on a number of factors, so I'm going to give you a few general tips to help you deal with these issues by taking the case of a typical destination for the average traveller. After a long flight, people are often tired and want to get to their final destination as soon as possible. You'd think that the quickest way would be to take a taxi, but because of traffic congestion, it turns out that it's usually better to take the train. Trains are cheaper than taxis, and taxis get caught in traffic jams, and they can't go through red lights. For some passengers, the most important consideration is to take a means of transport that is going to run according to schedule. Now, you would think that the train would be the best one for this. But as the airport train is operated by a private company, there have been a lot of problems integrating its running times with the publicly owned train network, and this has resulted in a lot of delays. Surveys on travelling to and from the airport have found that minibuses are the most dependable form of transport. There are other considerations too. If a person wants a comfortable ride with plenty of legroom after a long flight in a cramped seat, it'd be best for them to take one of the large air-conditioned buses. It's a new fleet with plenty of space for luggage, and on top of that, they're much cheaper than taxis. Some passengers are far more concerned about security. Of course, we can't guarantee that they won't be robbed or even cheated by a dishonest driver. So I think for them the best thing to do is to get someone who they know and trust to pick them up in their car. Finally, there's also the green traveller, who wants to cause the least possible pollution. Now, obviously, we can't tell them to walk because it's too far, particularly with heavy luggage. You might guess that public transport would be the cleanest way to travel, but it turns out that it's taxis, and that's because of the type of fuel they use. They're also, not surprisingly, the most popular choice of business people.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
So far, we've been focusing on the arrivals section of the airport. Now we're going to be looking at the departures section. You've all got a copy of the floor plan of the departures section of the airport. Because of the recent renovations, a lot of people are disoriented when they see it for the first time, so you need to be familiar with the new layout. At the bottom of the floor plan, you can see where the passengers check in. They then go through security control, and in front of them is the information desk, right in the middle of the whole floor plan. Just to the right of the information desk, there's a news agency where you can buy newspapers and magazines. For those who like to do a bit of shopping, to the left of the information desk we have a jewellery store. It's well worth a look at. And a well-stocked electronics goods shop. And between those two there is a pharmacy. There used to be a dress shop in that position. At the top right-hand corner of the diagram we have the waiting lounge and the exit to the planes. In the top left-hand corner are the public toilets. You can use those toilets, or if you like, there are also staff facilities near the bookshop, but you'll need to get the key. Just behind the information desk we have some food outlets, and over to the right, next to the waiting lounge, is a cafe. When the renovations are completed, it will function as an internet cafe. At most airports, you get people congregating on the footpath smoking, which is unpleasant for the non-smokers entering and leaving the building. For that reason, we've set up a dedicated smoking room inside the terminal next to the bookshop. It's well ventilated and looks out onto the tarmac. The original plan was to put a wine bar next to the bookshop, but there were problems with the licensing laws. I'd encourage you to walk around the airport to familiarise yourselves with the layout, so that you can more easily handle passengers' inquiries.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
You will hear two biology students called Helen and Colin talking about the report they are writing on their recent field trip to a seaside area called Rocky Bay. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
I've brought my notes on our biology field trip to Rocky Bay, Colin, so we can work on our report on the research we did together.
OK. I've got mine too. Let's look at the aims of the trip first.
Right. What did you have?
I just put something about getting experience of the different sorts of procedures used on a field trip. But we need something about what causes different organisms to choose particular habitats.
I agree. And something about finding out how to protect organisms in danger of dying out.
In our aims? But we weren't really looking at that.
I suppose not. OK, now there's the list of equipment we all had to bring on the field trip. What did they tell us to bring a ruler for?
It was something about measuring the slope of the shore. But of course we didn't need it because we were measuring wind direction and we'd brought the compass for that.
But not the piece of string to hold up in the air. Didn't Mr. Blake make a fuss about us leaving that behind?
Yeah, he does go on. Anyway, it was easy to get one from another of the students.
Now, the next section's the procedure. I sent you the draft of that.
Yeah, it was clear, but I don't think we need all these details of what time we left and what time we got back and how we divided up the different research tasks.
OK, I'll look at that again.
Then we have to describe our method of investigation in detail. So let's begin with how we measured wave speed. I was surprised how straightforward that was.
I'd expected us to have some sort of high-tech device, not just stand there and count the number of waves per minute. Not very precise, but I suppose it was good enough. But the way we measured the amount of salt was interesting.
In the water from the rock pools?
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to check the chemicals we used in the lab when we analysed those samples. Was it potassium chromate and silver nitrate?
That's right.
OK. And we need the map of the seashore. You just left that to me. And I had to do it while the tide was low. Well, that was OK, but the place I started it from was down on the beach. Then I realised I should have gone up higher to get better visibility, so I had to start all over again. But at least I'd got the squared paper, or I'd have had problems drawing it all to scale.
Yeah, it looks good. We could get a map of the region off the internet and see if we need to make any changes.
I had a look, but I couldn't find anything. But you took some pictures, didn't you?
Yeah, I'll email you them if you want.
OK. I'll make my amendments using those. Then I can scan it into our report. Great.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Now, when we get to our findings, I thought we could divide them up into the different zones we identified on the shore and the problems organisms face in each zone. So for the highest area...
The splash zone?
Yeah. We found mostly those tiny shellfish that have strong, hard shells that act as protection.
But not from other organisms that might eat them. Predators?
No, that's not the main danger for them, but the shells prevent them from drying out because they're in the open air for most of the time.
Right. And since they're exposed, they need to be able to find some sort of shelter or cover themselves up so they don't get too hot. Then in the middle and lower zones nearer the sea, we need to discuss the effects of wave action.
Yes, and how organisms develop structures to prevent themselves from being swept away or even destroyed by being smashed against the rocks.
I haven't done anything on the geological changes. I don't know what to put for that.
No, we weren't concentrating on that. Maybe we need to find some websites.
Good idea. I've got the lecture notes from Mr. Blake's geology course, but they're too general. But we could ask him which books on our reading list might be most helpful.
Right. OK. Now, I did a draft of the section of sources of possible error in our research, but I don't know if you agree. For example, the size of the sample and whether it's big enough to make any general conclusions from. But I thought actually we did have quite a big sample.
We did. And our general method of observation seemed quite reliable. But we might not be all that accurate as far as the actual numbers go.
Yeah, we might have missed some organisms, if they were hiding under a rock, for example. I wasn't sure about the way we described their habitats. I decided it was probably OK.
Yeah, and the descriptions we gave of the smaller organisms, they weren't very detailed, but they were adequate in this context. I'm not sure we identified all the species correctly, though.
OK, we'd better mention that. Now,
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
You are going to hear a lecture about various issues in land management and ownership systems by Professor Fred Roberts. You now have some time to read questions 31 to 40.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all looking so full of energy. Today I'm going to give an overview of some general principles and issues relating to land management and ownership. Very important. If we look at history, it seems that much of it concerns conflict over religion, economic power and land. Often all three factors are involved together. The first question one asks when talking about land is, who owns it? What you can do with land you own depends on one's political views. A far-right conservative may say ownership is the socially supported power to do what you want with the land you own, with no control by government, as long as what you do with it doesn't hurt others. You can imagine how different factions interpret hurt others. By contrast, the political left, socialists and, more to the left, communists say land ownership, private land ownership that is the root cause of much injustice in the world, and that the social protection of private land ownership can result in tyranny and oppression. They therefore argue for state, public and cooperative forms of land ownership. I would mention here that most of us take for granted the idea that everything must be owned by a person, people or an organisation. But some societies, notably some native North American tribes, seem to have no concept of personal ownership. It was normal for them simply to take anything they needed and for others to take it from them if they needed it. When European settlers came, the Indians behaved as usual, which led the Europeans to seeing them as thieves. But the European settlers grabbed the Native Americans' land, their most important possession. So who were the real thieves? However, in this day and age, it would be futile to think of getting rid of the concept of ownership. But let me return to land ownership. It's a complex issue. For example, should the owner have exclusive control over the rights of way, like traditional footpaths, or the migration routes of wild animals, or the ecologically important wetlands? Should the owner be allowed to destroy the whole lot by building expensive houses everywhere? Or what if the owner discovers hidden treasure that once belonged to the royal family? All such things raise questions of the rights of the owner as opposed to the rights of others, including animals, perhaps. Clearly, divergent views on such questions are a constant source of argument. What did the classical economists say about land ownership? Their positions were often rather ambiguous. Many of them seemed to consider it a necessary evil, and argued that it could not be defended if there was not some obligation to keep and improve the land. This is the concept of stewardship, that the land must be kept in good condition for future generations. But what if the owners were good stewards of their vast estates, but millions were going hungry? The Marxist answer was, and still is, land reform as a means of social justice. And in the 20th century, I mentioned ecological issues just now. Other reasons for legally restricting the rights of landowners have emerged. You can't cut the trees down because it would cause soil erosion that can spoil rivers hundreds of miles away. Pollution, the need to protect biodiversity, things that reduce the level of what we called nature's services to the general public, all have led to more restrictions on landowners' rights, at least in some countries, especially Europe. At the same time, property taxes have steadily increased to pay for essential services offered by the state or local government, such as firefighting. As these threats to the health of our planet get more serious, some people have argued that the ownership of natural capital, forests, wetlands, etc., will more and more be controlled by communal and not by private bodies. For example, the use by multinational companies of native plant varieties for modified crops and new drugs, plants that they seldom paid for in the past, are now increasingly recognized as belonging to the cultures or ecosystems from which they originated. But it seems to me that having the land and its flora and fauna owned by governments is no guarantee that they'll be used wisely, rather than for short-term profit. The evidence is that local ownership protected by law is usually the best answer. Okay, it will soon be time for a break, but before we have our coffee, I will give the answers to the two questions I asked you last time. What are the differences between leasehold and freehold? Essentially, the former allows possession for a limited time, while the latter is a special right granting the full use of real estate for an indeterminate time. In this country, most houses are sold with the land and the house itself freehold, whereas many flats are sold with a lease which was issued by the freeholder to the original leaseholder. The flat is then effectively owned by the leaseholder for an agreed number of years.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
So guys, don't forget like, subscribe and share my YouTube channel and my Facebook page, IELTS updates and recent exams. For more updates related to recent IELTS exam writing test topics, listening, reading, practice test and speaking, you cut guesswork. Please guys, participate in everyday new IELTS listening and reading practice tests to achieve your desired band score in your actual IELTS exam. For more IELTS material, visit my official website www.ieltsupdatesandrecentexams.com. The link is given below in the description. If you need PDF files of latest IELTS material, then please join my Telegram channel. So guys, please write your score below the comment section. Again, thanks for listening. God bless you all guys. Stay tuned, stay safe.